I've got good news and bad news today. Bad news is we're losing one of our long-standing members of the Tyler congregation. He's going to be going back to be back in his original area. Keith Slough has decided he needs to be back with his family at this point in his life and to be considering the remainder of his career. We really appreciated having him here. He's worked like a yeoman over the past 3.5 years now and reading mail here in the Tyler office. A lot of you people who will be hearing this on tape later may say, well, Keith who? And we all joke with him about what his name means, like Keith Slow and a few other little odds and ends like that I won't mention, but only his friends use these terms, of course. But we've really enjoyed having Keith with us, and we're sorry he's leaving us, and we wish him well and all the things that he's going to be doing in the years and the months ahead. He is being replaced in the Tyler office by Mr. Ian Houghton. He's been a member of the church for quite a long time. The local congregation here knows him, and of course, those of you in the field will probably be corresponding with him. Feel free to write directly to him. And by the way, any of you who will be listening to this tape later who want to write to Keith, feel free to write to him in care of the office, and we'll forward your letter on to him. I don't have his address to give you here, but we'll be glad to send your letter right on to him, and he'll be happy to hear from you if you would care to write. That's the bad news. The good news is that Mr. Ernest Planty, our minister in Milwaukee, is out of the hospital home and feeling great. He's doing very well. He appreciates your prayers. I talked to him on the phone yesterday afternoon. He sounded like nothing had ever happened. But he had to switch hospitals in the middle of his illness. They changed his medication, and he began to get better immediately. And so he seems to be fully recovered. They've got him now on a walking program. I think he's already up to a couple of miles a day that he's walking. And so he seems to be fully recovered from his heart attack, and we are very, very pleased to hear that and glad to announce that. Thanks to all of you who did remember to pray for Mr. Palante in his time of difficulty. Another piece of, I think, interesting information for all of you is that I'm going to make a prediction, miraculous prediction, as it were. The Tyler Church is going to double and triple and more in 1983, and we will not outgrow our room here. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Only a couple. Well, as a matter of fact, there are 40 people with us today whom you do not see. These are the members of the extended church who have already responded to the invitation we sent out to scattered people who don't live anywhere near a local congregation or a fellowship group or a minister. And we've written back to them saying, well, we wish we could help you more, but the best we can do for you now is to invite you to be a member of the Tyler Extended Church. And we'll send you tapes each week and the bulletin, and we'll correspond with you and talk to you on the telephone if you call in. Please don't call collect. But anyway, we'll do our best to serve those people as we can. And, of course, in due time, hopefully there'll be enough of them concentrated in different areas to begin churches. And there'll already be people who have had a good, strong association with a local church for some time. And that local church will be the Tyler congregation. So in your prayers and in your thoughts, and let's don't forget those people who are with us today, who actually won't be with us today until next week when they get this tape, but nevertheless are very much with us in spirit. And we do appreciate the fact that they are there. Our hearts go out to them in their what would otherwise be a very lonely situation. And you might also bear in mind that we're going to always try, if we have room left on the tape, to put this closing hymn on there. And you do a real good job singing for them, will you? Because it means a great deal to them. It's amazing how many of those people who get the tapes write back and say, could you please put a hymn on there or something so we can get more of the feeling of a local church. And they really are concerned about that. Someday I'd like to maybe do a tape that is just hymns on the piano all the way through for some of these local churches to use for accompaniment. I think it would be very helpful to them to be able to do that. But the extended church is going extremely well, and I think about just a little over a month, we've already got 40 people now who have replied saying, yes, we want to be a member of the extended church, and that's coming along very rapidly. We probably get about 40 requests for church information a month, and about half those people want to be on the extended church once we extend the invitation. So that's what I mean by the rapid growth to expect, frankly, in the Tyler church, as it were, over the course of the next year. One of the things I think that has sometimes been discouraging to our local congregations around the country is they sort of sit there week after week and they don't see growth in their own congregation, and they sort of think there isn't any growth taking place. And they're just not aware of the hundreds, actually, of new people that have come along and begun to request tapes and become on the tape program in the past 4 years who are scattered, and they're not anywhere near a local congregation. And we have had to work with them from here. We've worked with them sort of catch as catch can up until now. We're going to try our best to work with people a little more systematically in 1983 than we have been doing before this. We'll appreciate your prayers. We may in time even need some of your volunteer help. I don't think just yet, but we may later on need some of your help in some of the mailings that we'll be doing to these people, because if it grows very rapidly, it could present us with quite a problem in keeping up with the tape situation for all the people of the extended church. It also could create a bit of a financial burden for us as the group of people grows larger and larger. But on the other hand, these are God's people. They need very much the fellowship, even if it is only by a week late and on tape. They still need to know that they are with you and that you are with them. And so please remember them. This last Friday, I got my year-end reports, part of them at last, and began to work on them. These are a statistical analysis of the file, where we asked the computer to go through and just count different categories of things, of people, and of the things that people do. And we found some interesting things so far. I won't have a comprehensive report probably for another week yet, because it takes a great deal of time to sit there and stare at it and try to understand the significance of the numbers that you're looking at. But there are some very interesting things, too, I'll mention today, just for your interest's sake. We actually ended the year with a 16% increase in the number of donors in the file. And that was a very encouraging thing to see that take place, because you look at the overall dollar figure and you see how we're just barely percolating along just a little bit above last year. Although my initial indications are that the mail income, that is the income that comes in through the mail and is attributed to people's accounts, actually did a little bit better than our overall income picture did. But in any case, the income is not up nearly as much as the number of donors. But that 16% increase in just the concrete number of people who donated to the work in 1982 as opposed to 1981 is a real growth factor. The other side, the other aspect of it, which I found rather interesting, there is a category of people in the file which I'll refer to as one-time donors. Now, in any charitable organization, there is a certain percentage, and it will run more or less, just a little above or a little bit below, 50% in most charitable organizations, of the people who donate will donate one time and will never donate again. It's just one of those things that people do. We could speculate about the reasons for it, but because it doesn't vary much from organization to organization, we pretty well figure that's something we're going to have to live with year in, year out. And there's not much you can do to change that particular figure. So there is a number of people on the file. It runs, as I say, a little less than half in our case of the people who will donate one time and will never donate again. The interesting thing about that particular statistic this year was that the number of people who donated one time only this last year was up. But the total amount of money given by those people was down. Now, the interesting thing about it is that the average donation given by the one-time donor in 1981 was $30. The average donation given by the one-time donor in 1982 was $23. In other words, about a 22% decline, I think, is what I figured, something in that vicinity, in the amount of the donation made by the one-time donor. Now, the interesting thing about the one-time donor is he is not a systematic, committed giver. He's a person who either on impulse, what have you, out of what he has and the available funds that he has, decides to give out of his availability to you, out of what he has. What this tells me is that those people, on the average, have quite a bit less this year than they had last year. I mean, in 1982, they had less than they had in 1981. I would say that judging by that the recession factor in our income picture over the past year is something like a negative 22%. A negative 22%. And that is the impact of the recession on the donors to the Church of God. And you can see it also. I mean, I can't tell who are the tithe payers and who are not the tithe payers in our budget situation. But it is rather interesting that you can tell that the amount of money that the average person who makes on our file this past year was slightly less than the average made a year ago. Simple reason, some of them are making nothing this year, and they were making money the year before. So that you have a reduction in their availability and what they're actually able to give. And so as I search my way through the file, I'm finding information as I go along that shows signs of growth, but growth that has been hobbled in many cases by the economy and the recession that we are in at this time. So I'll be telling you a little bit more as I learn more about our mailing list. It has grown substantially over the last year. We ended the year with an active list of something in the neighborhood of 12,000. It'll be a little bit, I think, over 12,000 at the end of this year. Our total mailing list, though, has grown well over 20,000. I don't have that exact figure and won't probably for another month until we get around to doing some mailings to the inactives and get the whole list put together to see what it is. But we are maintaining a strong active list, and the percentage of that list who are donors has grown considerably over the past year. So we are very pleased to see the growth in the interest of the people and the involvement of people in the field to our work over the past year. Another thing that I did notice that at first I didn't understand was that we had a dramatic increase last year in the number of people who donated monthly. I didn't understand really why that was at first. I thought, what is it reflecting? And I got to thinking about it, and I began to realize that 1982 was probably the first year that we really got systematic with our monthly mailings and didn't fail to mail to people on a very consistent, systematic basis. And as a result, the number of people who donated 11 times or more during the year was up dramatically over 1981. So you could see a really strong, definite effect from the regularity of the mailings that we are doing to people, of communicating with the membership, of communicating with the people on the list, of offering the new literature that we have, of offering a new tape on some subject of interest to people, so that we maintain that contact with people. Now, I do want to emphasize to everyone that the donations in themselves are not what I feel, they are nothing more than a means to an end. They are the fuel that does the work. And by looking at them, we are able to have one evaluation of the degree of people's response and commitment to what we are doing. In other words, we do the work. The question is, what effect is it having out there? Well, about one of the very few ways that we can tell. We have two different clear ways. One is by the booklets and the tapes that are requested, and the other is by the donations that people make. And it's very difficult to evaluate the extent of the effectiveness of books and booklets mailed out. But the response, the financial response of people, is a very real indicator of their involvement in and their support for the work that we are doing. So that's just sort of a report card, as it were, on the part of the people out there in the field telling us, yeah, we're with you. Yes, we're trying to support your work, and to the best of our ability. And at the same time, we can look down deep into the file and say, yeah, we can see that they are supporting us to the best of their ability. It's just that their ability has been severely impaired in 1982 over what it was in the years before. Not only their ability has been impaired, but also, to some extent, their confidence, not necessarily in the church, but in the economy, has been impaired. And a lot of people are saving money now that they might have spent or given away a year before that, simply on the basis that they think they may need it in 1983 to feed their families or put shoes on their kids or pay the rent or make the house payment as it comes along. Well, that brings me to my sermon topic today, which is the other item of good news, is that I'm not going to hit you this week one more time with the History and Prophecy series. I'm going to put it off and interrupt it this one week to talk about something slightly different. How do you feel about 1983, the year that's just ahead? What sort of emotion do you have when you look ahead? What sort of feelings do you have about the year and its prospects for you and your family? A bit apprehensive, perhaps? Maybe even a little bit grim. My wife and I usually make it a custom on Friday nights of watching Washington Week in Review on public television. And the one right there at the end of the year was enough to make you want to go out and jump off the corner of a high building somewhere. It was so depressing as these men discussed the economy for virtually the whole program and the very difficult situation that we're in. Most people are very apprehensive about 1983 and about what it means, and a lot of their apprehension is based upon economic consideration. The world economy seems very fragile. The world seems a very dangerous place to be in right now, with the potential for war ever present. The problem then, depression threatens people. It could even actually make you long for inflation again, if you think about it. You start seeing all the depression and people out of work. You begin to think, was that 10% inflation really all that bad? Did we really have to whip it that fast? Was it really critical that we get in there and try to jump on top of all this? Well, has been, and I heard a great deal of it on Washington Week in Review last week, and there's been a lot of hand-wringing on people's parts. But is this the way that the Christian should face 1983? With apprehension and hand-wringing, with a certain amount of depression or despair about how things might go in the future, and a fear for your livelihood, not necessarily your life. Or on the other hand, should a Christian have hope and confidence and courage? Well, now, we all really know how we ought to feel, don't we? We all know that a Christian ought to be facing the future with confidence and hope and courage and faith, and not be fearful or allow himself to fall into depression along the way. But the truth is that many of us do look ahead to 1983 with a certain dread, with a certain apprehension and a certain concern, and maybe even feel a little bit guilty because we don't really have the confidence that we ought to have. Now, there are some things that I feel you should consider in facing 1983, and they fall in two broad categories: secular and spiritual. By secular, I mean those things having to do with the world, the economy, just with the way that things are. First, there is a built-in negative bias in most journalists, whether they be print journalists or electronic journalists, television, radio, or what have you. It's a rather simple thing. It's not that complicated or difficult to understand. These men they really want to be objective. They really want to be straightforward in the reporting of the news, to tell it like it is, as it is. But the problem is that good news doesn't really sell like bad news does. It's not really as dramatic as bad news is. Now, you can actually go out and do an expose. You can go out and trap some fellow in his lies right on television, have him right on camera. And it's exciting, it's dramatic, it builds ratings. And guess what the ratings mean to a television network that's putting together a news program? Well, they have a direct bearing on how much they can charge for a 30-second spot in the middle of that program. And so when you think about it from the standpoint of the journalist, I mean, I'm the reporter. I've got the microphone in my hand, and one of you guys has got the camera, and we're going out and sticking a microphone under people's noses and trying to get a story. Okay, from my perspective, I want to be objective. I want to tell the truth. I want to tell it like it is. I want to be honest and all these types of things. Back at the studio, however, I have got my director and producer and the owner of the television station, who's got to sell advertising in this news program. And he's concerned about his ratings, and so the pressure is on. And the rewards, the money, the salary, the encouragement, the plaudits, the medals, the certificates on the wall go to the journalist, the story writer, the interviewer, who can produce the more dramatic, not the better stories, but who can produce the best ratings, who can hold on to the viewers, who can really sell this newspaper, this television station, or whatever else it is we're involved in. In other words, they're in a business. They are, after all, merchants. They have to sell their product. And so consequently, the result of that is they tend to go at things in a rather interesting way. And what was interesting about this particular evening where we saw Washington Week in Review, as I said, you felt like going up and getting on the edge of a tall building and jumping off after listening to these reporters. Then came Wall Street Week, right on the heels of it, and they were all optimistic and upbeat about 1983. They felt that the low on the Dow would be something like 960, and the high could be as high as 1,300, maybe even a little bit higher. And they felt that the economy had made a turnaround, and that while it wasn't going to go like gangbusters, there would be a recovery through 1983, that employment would begin to decline, however slowly, by 1984, and basically that the worst of it was over. And so it goes. You have this group over here and this group over here. Now, the difference between these two, so on the one hand, you have journalists who seem to have this built-in bias. On the other hand, you have people who are actually backing their vision of 1983 with their wallet, with their bank accounts, with actual dollars and cents at their chips, as it were, they're shoving into the table to actually bet on their forecast for the coming year. Whereas the journalist, what does he have at stake? Well, he has his reputation, in a sense, if anybody even remembers what it was that he said a year ago was going to happen to the economy somewhere downstream. But in the meantime, he manages to sell his story. Now, on top of this, the second thing you want to bear in mind from the secular aspect of it is that most of us have a built-in negative bias ourselves. Why do you suppose we do that? Maybe you don't even agree with me it's true, but you need to give that a little thought, and the people you know and your own reaction. Have you ever had things going really well for you? I mean, really well for you. And as everything was suddenly breaking your way, have this horrible feeling come over you that says, this is too good to be true. Sure you have. This dread, this sudden apprehension that it's too good to last. It won't last. Something will happen. It'll go wrong. And sometimes it even becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It results in the old saying we used to have in the Navy about certain types of people, say he just can't stand prosperity. You know, he's always got to be meddling with it, always got to be changing. Everything can be going wonderful, and he can't stand it that way. He's got to stick his foot in there and somehow change something and wreck it. He just can't stand prosperity. Why are we that way? Oh, the reason is really very simple. It's not the least bit elusive. It's just that in our lifetime there have been too many occasions where things have gone wrong when we expected them to go right. And it hurts much worse when it goes wrong when you expect it to go right than going wrong when you expect it to go wrong. And so consequently, in order to buffer ourselves, in order to keep ourselves from getting hurt, we just expect the worst. And we say, we play this game that Eric Byrne called, Ain't It Awful? You know, look at the economy, ain't it awful? You know, look at how many people are out of work, ain't it awful? And look at the way people are acting, ain't it awful? And we go around, you know, just let's start listening for the old ain't it awful game. And it may not be in exactly those terms. People may not use those three words. But you'll hear the term nowadays, or time was, or the good old days, and all these are our versions of the game, ain't it awful? When people start longing for the good old days, they're saying, ain't it awful nowadays? A real popular game that a lot of us play. And there's nothing unusual about it, I say. All we are doing is sort of anticipating our fears and thinking to ourselves, it will be sweeter if it goes right, and it won't hurt as bad if it goes wrong. So I'm going to just adopt the posture that it's bound to go wrong. Now, that also has something to do with the reason why journalists, both television journalists and print journalists, have a negative bias as well. Not only do they have their own nature and their own feelings to deal with, they have yours as well. And they know what you buy and what you want to hear. And, of course, if they tell you things are going to be bad and they go well, you're prone to forgive. If they tell you it's going to go well and then it goes bad, you'll never forget it. You'll never forget it. And so it's an old part of the game of protecting your backside, you know. You've got to look out for what might happen, and you hedge your bets and don't stick your neck out and so forth. So you have to keep this in your thinking. When you look ahead to 1983, and you know the apprehension that you felt down in your bowels, as it were, to use the biblical language, when you think about what might happen in the course of this year, that dread, that anxiety, that concern, some of it grows out of nothing more than that slight little negative bias that a lot of us have built into our lives and that willingness to expect the worst. And that's not to say that the worst may not happen. As they say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not really out to get you. The third thing that you need to bear in mind as you watch 1983 unfold before you, the degree of pessimism extant in society is a reflection of recent events, that is, of current events, current history, and is of no value in forecasting. Now, a lot of stock market analysts have actually used various pessimism, optimism indicators. And they do this by simply counting the number of articles in the Wall Street Journal on the front page that are pessimistic in nature and negative about the economy, as opposed to the number that are optimistic or positive about the economy. And they have other types of little things that they look at. They look at the bearishness or bullishness, that is the negative, positive bias of market analysts and advisory letters. And they put all these things together and they weigh them up, sometimes even using computer analysis, and they come up with a negativism, positivism index. And it's really quite an objective index of the emotional content of society at large at a given moment of time. In other words, the pessimism of society can be objectively measured. Think about that for a moment. However, the degree of pessimism in society is of no value in forecasting the future. It is only telling you what's going on right now. How does it work? It's really very simple. The economy is percolating along here at 100%. Everything's going fine. It declines 10%. 10 people suddenly get to feeling very negative about what's going on out here. The market goes down another 10%. And 10 more people get to feeling negative about what's going on out here. Now we got 20 people negative as a result of this 20% decline. Then it goes down 10 more percent. Now we got 30 people negative as a result of this 30% decline. The market then turns back up. People begin to become more positive. It's simple, isn't it? As things begin to go bad, more and more people become pessimistic. When they start getting better, more and more people become optimistic. Therefore, people will always be the most pessimistic right at the very bottom. Write that down. That's Dart's Law. Dart's Law of pessimism. People will always be most pessimistic right at the very bottom. Now, this has created in investors' world what they call the contrary opinion. You have a number of investors who watch that pessimism of people, and they are looking for the evaporation of optimism out of the marketplace. And then they conclude, when all this optimism is gone, when you flushed all these optimists out of the thing, and everybody's really gloomy and depressed, buy. It's time to rush into the market and buy stocks because they're going to turn around and go right back up. Well, so far they haven't been exactly right. They've had a real good run-up this past year, but people have continued to become more and more pessimistic during this period of time, and the economy, of course, has continued down for some ways further. But those people in the stock market are anticipating, because if they wait until the economy turns around, they will have missed the move. What oftentimes happens in the stock market is the stock market makes a big run-up during the anticipation stage, and when the economy actually turns around and really begins to move up, the stock market levels off and even begins to decline. So if you buy when the economy moves, the chances are you're going to be too late to make any money in the stock market. Now, I don't expect any of you to go out and use that information, because I think for anybody who's not really paid his dues and very knowledgeable to invest in the stock market is foolish in the extreme. I simply use it as an illustration of people's evaluation of pessimism and optimism and the general feelings of people. Because see, what we're dealing with essentially is human emotion. And human emotion is a reaction to what's going on, not a predictor of what will happen. That's all I'm trying to tell you. So consequently, when you look around you and it's gloom and doom on every side, and when they're becoming more and more pessimistic every day in the newspaper, that does not mean that it will be worse tomorrow. Because it will, those headlines will all be at their very worst the day everything bottoms out and starts back up again along the way. So that brings me to point number 4 you need to remember in 1983. And that is, this is basically already stated, the highest degree of pessimism almost always coincides with the bottoming out. And as I said, I've always said, the old stock market adage is that you buy when the blood is running in the streets. And that takes an awfully tough-minded person. I don't know if I've quite got the emotional makeup to be able to make a decision to go out and start buying and developing my business and moving ahead when the blood is running in the streets. But that is what some of the people in the past have done, who have done the most and made the most. In fact, as I said, point number 5 for you to remember is it takes an iron will on the part of a carnal man to buck the trend and to run against the crowd. But that's what guys like old Joe Kennedy did, who had his money in cash and was able to buy right after the big stock market break in 1929. In fact, I think he did most of his buying on down in 1930 when the stock market was even lower than it was in 1929. Number 6, if I may borrow a phrase, don't be dismayed at the signs of the heathen. That basically, you got all these things going on around you that people look at and become dismayed at, and you really shouldn't allow yourself to be swept away by all these things that you see taking place around you. When most of the world is expecting catastrophe, is not likely to be the time when it comes. Now, many people in God's church over the years have made what I feel is a fundamental mistake. We have looked at what the world saw as a coming catastrophe and said, aha, see this? Prophecy is about to be fulfilled. And people wind up setting dates, such as 1972 or 1914, or I forget some of the dates that people have set along the way. One was around 1936. And people get very excited about all these things happening. But the problem is that the indication, what prophecy seems to tell us, is it's not what the world thinks is going to happen. That you need to be concerned about where prophecy is concerned. That when the whole world sees that catastrophe is coming, chances are it's not. Don't be dismayed at the signs of the heathen. Number 7. This is Dart's opinion. The odds are 10 to 1 that we will pull out of this recession that we are in right now gradually doing so in 1983. There may be a setback in 1984, but I personally do not believe it will go into what could be called a worldwide depression. The odds are 10 to 1 that that will not happen. The economy will cycle, and these cycles must not be allowed to dominate your thinking and your mind and cause you to make bad decisions based upon some assumption of prophecy. Be very careful about that, because people have done this in the past. They've done silly things like not get their teeth fixed because they thought the Lord was coming back at a certain date, only to wind up having to spend much, much, much more money because costs had risen in the meantime, their teeth had gotten worse in the meantime, and they had to face a lot more serious problems as a result of having done that. Now, that's my opinion. I could be wrong. And that brings me to point number 8. Even if we don't pull out, and that 1 in 10 chance of depression came to pass, there is a spiritual side of all of this that the Christian has got to think about, which also must influence our attitude and the way we think about it. So now let's shift away from the secular side of it, because after all, I'm not really a specialist in that area. Why should we be worried about what's going to happen to the physical world, to the economy and all these things around us? Why should we as Christians have furrowed brow and get ourselves into a state of depression or become fearful or even make some bad decisions along the way? We worry essentially because of a wrong fundamental concept, because of a mistake that we have made along the way. We start with our ordinary self, with all of its desires and its wants and its interests and its hopes. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but we have just the ordinary man in the street. He wants to get married and have children. He wants to have a home. He'd like to own a fairly decent car. He'd like to have a steady job that he enjoyed going to every morning, and rather than dreading it. He'd like to have some time for recreational activities and to go boating on the lake with his children and to go fishing or take a float trip or have a skiing vacation. And then maybe get a little older and get on to around age 55 or 60 and have done well enough to be able to retire early and do some travel that he and his wife would like to do, like to go see some places we thought about and dreamed about. We have all this set of desires and things and wants that we ourselves would like to do. Now, in addition then to this natural man, we proceed to recognize claims on the self. For example, there is a general idea of morality that we have in our society and our world that grows out of the Bible that makes certain claims upon our life and our wants. In other words, there are some of our wants that we are not allowed to indulge because it would go contrary to our idea of morality. And so we have a restraint that is placed upon it. There are other kind of claims on the self, such as decent behavior. There are things that are decent behavior and things that are not decent behavior that have to influence the self with its wants and its desires and its hopes. There's God's law, which also exercises a claim on the self. There is love of neighbor, which exercises a claim upon oneself. Now, some things we want to do are wrong, and we have to give them up, right? We all know that. That's no big problem. There are some things that we don't want to do that are right, and we must do them anyway. Okay, so we got the natural self here with a whole bunch of wants, desires, things we'd like to have. Then some claims that come in of things that we can't do that we want to do because of these claims. And there are some things that we must do that we'd rather not do because of these claims. But we hope that when all these claims have been met, there will be something left for the poor old natural self to go out and enjoy. We're sort of like the honest man when he pays his taxes. You know, he has this tax and that tax, and he has that he has to pay the taxes on his home, his land. He has to pay the taxes on his income. He has perhaps other taxes that come along. He has to carefully get down, write out his checks for these things, pay his taxes, and he hopes that whenever he gets through with all that, that there will be something left for him to enjoy now, and something left for his old age, and something left to leave to his children along the way. Now, it's in times like 1983 when we get depressed because we see all these things that our natural self hoped for being squeezed out. In other words, there's already all these other claims that are being made, and we work on them, and we understand those claims, and we sometimes even joyfully accept and bear the responsibility for those claims, but we still have the hope that when all is said and done and all of it's left over, there will still be something left for me. Then you come into a bad economic situation the danger of war coming along, and you see all these things left for you now having almost like another claim placed upon them, one that's out of your control and one that you really don't know how to deal with. And it's times like this, as I said, that Christians can find themselves getting a little bit depressed. Sometimes people give up on Christianity, but in any case, those who still fight this battle this way wind up being unhappy people. Even though they're Christians and they do what's right and they try their best to get along and to do these things, they are not really at all happy in the things that they're doing. Now, when I got this place in my notes, it was inescapable that I had to turn back to Luke the 14th chapter, and I'd like for you to go with me, because there are in here some very interesting statements. And perhaps looking at the world like we're looking at it right now and understanding the needs and the hopes of a human being, maybe this particular chapter might say something to us it hasn't said before. In verse 15 of Luke 14, one of them that sat at meat with him heard these things and said to him, "Blessed is he that shall eat bread in the kingdom of God." He said to him, "A certain man made a great supper and bade many. And he sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, Come, for all things are now ready. And they all with one consent began to make excuse. The first said to him, I have bought a piece of ground, and I must needs go and see it. I pray you, have me excused. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray you, have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and I can't come. So that servant came and showed his lord these things, and the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in here the poor, and the maimed, and the halt, and the blind. The servant said, Lord, it's done as you commanded, and there's still room. And the Lord said to the servant, Go out into the highways and hedges, and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I say to you, that none of these men which were bidden shall taste of my supper. I read that, and I thought to myself, over the years, I've encountered this with young people coming into college who were not even yet baptized, as a matter of fact, young, maybe older teenagers, sometimes maybe younger teenagers. And maybe some of your parents have had your children even ask the question in a way this way, where they have kind of said something to the effect that, when the kingdom of God comes, will I still be able to get married? And will I be able to have children? And if I am baptized, and Christ comes back before I get a chance to get married and I become a spirit being, does that mean I'll not have a chance to be married and have children and have a family? Now, you can understand, I think, from a child who has sat in church and listened to our sermons sometimes, which are not directed at children. We're not really thinking about the children. We don't really understand sometimes or grasp how it will hit their minds. That the children can grow up to young teenagers and teenagers in the church with an idea in their mind that the Lord is going to come back, and they will never in their lives be able to enjoy the feel of a good car on the road, a good fast car going down the road and taking the curves close to the limits of your tires. They'll never be able to experience what it's like to get out there and have a job or say to fly an airplane or to get married and have children. And you can easily see how a young person who's not baptized could come to the place to where they almost begin to resent the idea of the return of Christ and the establishment of the kingdom, because all of these things that they might be wanting or desiring or needing are all going to be denied to them. And we've, I think, very definitely erred in not taking that into consideration and making the young people in the church realize that far greater things lie in store for them as physical flesh and blood human beings in the kingdom of God, should they not be converted before Christ returns, and that even greater things are in store for them than any of these things that they could ever imagine if they are. That there is no loss, there's only a greater thing. And that if you really did want still to drive the car, if you really did want still to fly the airplane, you could do so, but I can promise you at that time it will be a matter of no interest to you, because of the other things that will be of even greater interest and greater concern when that time comes. Now, as I said, it's one thing for the children. But the truth of the matter is that those of us who are adults and who are in good health and have got plans and have laid out goals and are striving toward objectives may find ourselves from time to time kind of hoping that all this isn't going to come apart just yet. I've still got a few things I want to do. I've still got some places I'd like to go. I've still got some people I want to meet. I've still got some things that I want to do. Truth to tell, those of us who pray the most fervently for God's kingdom to come are those of us who are in pain, without much hope of ever getting out of pain, Are those of us who are getting a bit old, a little bit long in the tooth as the saying goes, and life doesn't have quite as much pleasure as it might have had at one time? It's not the people who are swinging and living and going full speed ahead and having a lot of fun every day. Those are not the people who get on their knees at night with tears running down their face, oh God, thy kingdom come, is it? And so we have to understand this spiritual side of things and the hazards that are involved when you are bidden to the table of the Lord and you say, well, I've got this to do and I've got that to do and I want to go over here. That the grave danger is that the whole thing could be lost to you. But that's not all that I want to say on this subject. Continuing in verse 25. There went great multitudes with him. And he turned and he said to them, if any man will come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me, he cannot be my disciple. For which of you intending to build a tower sits not down first and counts the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Lest haply, after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, everybody that beholds it begins to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. What's this all about? What it is telling you, look, you better count the cost before you put your hand to the plow, before you take the first step down the road to becoming a Christian. Because the cost may be more than you have anticipated to start with. Or what king going to make war against another king doesn't sit down first and analyze, say, okay, I've got 1,000 men, he's got 10,000 men. What's going to happen when I go charging out there? I think I'd better send an ambassador and talk to him before I go charging out there. Verse 33, so likewise, whoever he be of you that forsakes not all that he has, he cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land, nor yet for the dunghill, but men cast it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now, thinking our way back again, and here we are standing at the threshold of 1983 and looking forward again with all these thoughts and all of the turmoil that we may have, and let's be honest about how we feel. Keep in mind that God isn't after some of your time and some of your money and some of your labor, some of your interest. He's after you, all of you, every bit of you, wingtip to wingtip, head to toe, whatever it is that there is of you. This is what God wants. Not part, not some, all. All of you, all of your resources, all of your thoughts, all of your time. Nor is God merely working for a better you. Is God satisfied with improvement on your part? No. No, he's not. Is he pleased with improvement on your part? Oh, yes. Yes, it is. Someone once said, God is easy to please, but hard to satisfy. And that's the way I think it probably is. Oh, yeah, he's pleased with improvement, but he's not satisfied because he is not merely working for a better you. What did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount? Be you therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Oh, I'm aware of all of the rationalization that people have as well. It means mature, it means this, or it means the other thing, all of which are simply ways of trying to avoid coming to grips with what God really wants of man. That God expects, demands, insists on, and will have perfection from you and from me in whatever the highest sense of that word could possibly be. C.S. Lewis, an English writer of the book, he wrote a book called Mere Christianity back in 1943. He drew an interesting analogy. He said that when I was a child, I would, very commonly get a toothache. I guess he had a problem with his teeth. A lot of British people do. He said I frequently had a toothache, and I knew that if I went to my mother would give me an aspirin, and I'd get rid of most of my pain, and I would be able to go to sleep. And I had no doubt that if I had the toothache and I had the pain, and I had no doubt that if I went to my mother and I asked, I would get something to help me with the pain. But I often did not go. In fact, he said I never did go until it got very bad. Now, why do you suppose he would do that? Why would you do a thing like that? Why, when you knew that the relief was there, would you not go? Well, his answer is very simple. He says, if I went, my mother would give me the aspirin, and it would help, and I would get a good night's sleep. But the next morning, she would take me to the dentist. So I tried for her not to know. Now, the problem with that dentist is, he said that you get in this dentist, and the dentist will not be satisfied with just trying to straighten out or to cure or to help this one tooth that aches. He's going to go poking and rummaging around all the rest of your teeth because he's not going to be satisfied with anything less than a perfect set of teeth. And they're always going to be finding something wrong with some of your other teeth that aren't hurting you right now and aren't giving you any problem right now. And you're going to have to endure not less pain, but more while this man's... Read that particular phrase, you seem to get the impression that Jesus, and after all, he's told you all kinds of other things to do, like turn the other cheek and love your neighbors and so forth. So when he says, "Be you therefore perfect," it's almost like a commandment. I've got to figure out what to do and begin to try to discipline myself and to work toward being perfect, and that God's going to be unhappy with me if I have not achieved that perfection at a given moment in time. Now, Lewis didn't look at it that way. He thought his own belief would be quoted like this, quote, quoting God, "The only help I will give is to help you become perfect. You may want something less, but I will give you nothing less." Now, that's thought-provoking. I have to give that very sober consideration, because it's probably true, in one sense of the word, that if I consider the price that perfection would cost, I want to be better. I want to be rid of pain. I want sins out of my life that cause me problems or give me difficulties or what have you. I want to be made better. But I am not driven personally with a desire to become perfect. And yet I see this in God's Word as a command. And I know that once I actually allow Him into my life, He's not going to just stop with straightening out this one thing that I went to see Him about, is He? He's going to work on something else, and then something else, and something more. And one preacher once upon a time allowed us how that God, it was like asking God into your house to help you with some of the problems you had. And so God comes in and He clears out the plumbing, and He straightens out the electrical wiring. But then the first thing you know, He's starting to knock out walls. And He's taking the roof off the place. And He knocks out another wall. And the first thing you realize, the whole house is being demolished. And He's starting to lay out plans for putting a wing over here and a big wing over here and a turret and a battlement. And all of a sudden you realize He's not satisfied with just straightening out your plumbing and your electrical wiring. He's building a mansion that you never asked for. Why is He doing this? Because He's going to live in it Himself. Therefore, if He's going to come into your life is going to be radically overhauled, whether you like it or not. Oh, well, now if you don't like it, you can push Him away, or you can walk away, or you can refuse. You cannot, accept what He gives you. But if you don't, He's going to make you perfect if it kills you. And it may. Many people go to God expecting to be straightened out or cured of some sin. Maybe problem I drink too much, and I'm going to pray and I'm going to ask God to help me straighten out the drinking. Oh, He'll do that. But He won't stop there. That's not all He's going to do. That once you call Him in as a physician, spiritually speaking, you're going to get the full treatment. Not just the little thing or the small thing or whatever it is that you thought you might need or want at that point in time. Now, we have a free will. We can walk away whenever we choose. I got to thinking about it, that not long ago, I started a line of dental treatment. There were certain things that I had put up with for years that needed to be corrected. I had some teeth out along this lower left-hand side over here that left me with an awful gap. And it was kind of an aggravation because I couldn't chew very well on the left-hand side of my mouth, and I wasn't too much better on the right-hand side. So I thought, well, I'll begin to get some bridge work done. Now, I sort of counted part of the cost before I started on that whole rigmarole, but I didn't really know altogether all that was involved in it. Now, the dentist was a very fine fellow. He does a good work, and he's quite a professional at what he does. And, of course, he got back there and gave me all the shots that made everything dead in this part of my mouth. But he couldn't do anything about my mind. And I become very tense in the dental chair. And, of course, the work he was going to do to put a bridge in, it's a 4-tooth bridge, and for all those of you who don't know, they have to grind off the front and the back tooth down to where they form a little stump to act as a support for the bridge. And then they do molds, and they create a bridge that will then glue down on those two stumps and form a set of teeth right underneath your upper teeth, all supported in your mouth. Permanent bridge work just sits there from now on out. And that all sounds real good. Until about the third hour, when he's had your mouth propped open, and you're in total tension the whole period of time, and with the struggles that are going on in your mouth, and you finally, and I have had to on several occasions ask him to stop for a minute, let me sit up and take a break and rest and let everything unwind, so that I can then go back and let him continue with it. Now there were times when I fully felt like saying, hey, let's just call this whole thing off. And I could have at any number of points in time, I could have just taken the little bib off and rinsed my mouth out and just walked out the front door of his office, never gone back. Problem was that I would have been left with two teeth here where the enamel had been ground off of them, very vulnerable. They were still very sensitive. I would have had nothing but trouble with them from there on out. Now, in a very small way, this illustrates what the Bible is talking about, that it is better for you not to have known the way of righteousness than having known it to turn from it. It is better never to start down this road than to start and then stop and turn back. But many of us have done that. We have actually walked a certain way with God, and it's become painful or uncomfortable. The tension is built up, and we've asked God to back off. And we've backed off. And for some of us, it may be 6 months, it may be a year, or it may be 6 years. But Peter talks about it, and as other apostles do, that the man who has known God or has started out with God or has started on this road to perfection that God is going to be working with him on, and then turns back, it would have been better for him never to have started. The latter end is worse than the first. And indeed, I would have been in much worse shape if I had stopped halfway through the treatment than I would if I had never started it in the first place. So count the cost. That's what it's about, you see. Is you figure this thing out beforehand. Do I really want to go down this road? Do I really want God to overhaul me in this way? The temptation to go back is oftentimes there for the Christian. Now, if you don't back off, God will see the thing through to the end. I want you to turn back to a scripture that people are puzzled about and ask about again and again and again. And that's in the 8th chapter of Romans, in verse 28. Romans 8, and verse 28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. In other words, all the pain, all the suffering, all the loss, all the heartache is being worked toward that end of perfection that God is working. All things are working together toward that goal for those who love God and are called by him. For whom he did foreknow, he did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. And whom he did predestinate, them he also called. Them whom he called, them he also justified. And whom he justified, them he also glorified. What is it saying? What it's saying is that once God starts the course of treatment with you, you can quit. He can't. And he won't. What shall we say then to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? He that spared not his own Son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him freely give us all things, including perfection? Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? It's God that justifies. Who is he that condemns? It is rather Christ that died, or yea, rather is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, and who makes intercession for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, sword? Separate us? Why, they're actually in some cases the instruments of the love of Christ, as he shapes and as he molds and grinds and tries to make us into what it is he wants us to be, intends for us to be, wills us to be. And you are the only person who can turn that back. Satan can't. No man can. I can't turn you back. No one can. Only you can make that decision. As it is written, for your sake we are killed all the day long. We are accounted like sheep for the slaughter. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors. What do you mean more than conquerors? How can you be more than a conqueror? Well, to be a conqueror is simply to win out over your trials and your tribulations and come out the other side whole. To be more than a conqueror is to come out the other side more than whole. perfect. That's what it means. Then he goes on to say, for I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. C.S. Lewis made a statement in this book that I want to read to you because I can't think of any better way of putting it than the way that he put it. You may have over the years thought that the idea of becoming God was unique to the Church of God, to the worldwide Church of God, and those associated with it. This book was written in 1943. Listen to what he says. The command, be you perfect, is not idealistic gas, nor is it a command to do the impossible. He is going to make us into creatures that can obey that command. Ah, I see. Not that I can obey it today. He is going to make me into a creature that can obey the commandment, be thou perfect. He said in the Bible that we were gods, and he is going to make good his words if we let him. For we can prevent him if we choose. He will make the feeblest and filthiest of us into a god or goddess, dazzling, radiant, immortal creature, pulsating all through with such energy and joy and wisdom and love as we cannot now imagine. A bright, stainless mirror which reflects back to God perfectly, though of course on a smaller scale, his own boundless power and delight and goodness. The process will be long in parts, and in parts very painful. But that is what we are in for, nothing less. He meant what he said. Notice, he will make, if we choose, the feeblest and filthiest of us into a god or goddess, dazzling, radiant, immortal creature. It's incredible to think about that. Here's a man who wrote this back in 1943. You kind of wonder how these ideas get buried, and why it is that so few people seem to have any concept of what it is that God has in store for them, has in store for man. Now, as you face 1983, how do you feel? Well, you know, there are many things to be concerned about. It is necessary, of course, as we face 1983, to order our affairs as prudent men would do, because there are certain things that I think call for wisdom. It would be foolish for a man who is working in an industry that was somewhat at risk to unemployment layoffs to go out and buy himself a new home or a new car at this particular point in time. There are many things I could go on and list that would be foolish for us to do. We should try to order our affairs as prudent men will. But we should not dread the things that lie ahead. We may feel sorrow at the suffering of people, but all that will do is provide us with an opportunity to be of help to people. We may feel sorry at the fact that we ourselves lose some things that we have hold dear and have cherished. And yet the same thing, we have to realize that the economy can't separate us from the love of God. And that even the trials and the temptations or the loss that we might suffer is nothing but an instrument in the hands of God to make us into creatures who can obey the command, be you perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. It is kind of silly in a way, isn't it? For individuals called by God and with whom he is working and to whom he has laid out the destiny to become gods and goddesses, to face this year or any year with anything but confidence and courage and hope and maybe a yearning more than ever for God's kingdom to come.